Usually, LGBTQ plus co-operators would hold our fringe event in a local pub at party conference. Wherever possible, we've made that one of our own community venues. Sadly, it's not been possible for us to do that this year, and I know I've missed the opportunity to have a drink and some food and catch up with people and just learn what everyone else is doing. So we decided this year we'd bring the pub to our first mainstream session at a party conference, but more of that shortly. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Penberthy, a Labour and Co-operative councillor in Plymouth, where I'm the Cabinet Member for Housing and Co-operative Development. My portfolio includes the brief for equalities and diversity. I'm also actively involved in a number of local co-ops and chair the Co-operative Council's Innovation Network Values and Principles Board. I'm the Member and Communications Officer in our local party branch and sit on our party council, so bring in lots of different perspectives of cooperatives to my day-to-day life. I'd like to start with a little bit of background about our network. The idea for a specific LGBTQ+ network within the Cooperative Party emerged during the 2016 national policy process on equalities. The initial conversation at a Southwest Peninsula Party Council summer school focused on two key areas: the need for the party to have a network for its LGBTQ+ members, and the potential role of the cooperative movement in saving and developing spaces for our community. That was already a really big issue in a largely rural area like ours down here. Following discussions held during the year with various LGBTQ+ members across the country, an initial meeting was held during the annual conference in Cardiff. And at that small event, it was felt that in the early stages, the network should be informal and work towards being formally recognised by the party as part of its structures. By the end of 2016, we'd agreed that our aims are to encourage LGBTQ+ people to become active members of the Cooperative Party, to support the promotion of more LGBTQ+ candidates internally in the Cooperative Party, and for public office at all levels, to campaign for full legal and social equality for LGBTQ+ people, and to facilitate engagement between LGBTQ+ people in all parts of the cooperative movement to support appropriate practical and policy responses to the needs of our communities. We also agreed that we wanted over time to be able to develop a programme of support, training, development, campaigning and social activities. So that was a really big set of stuff for a small group of people to start thinking about. But since that time, we've been represented at a number of prides every year. We've hosted fringe events at every National Party conference since then, and at a few other of the party's national and regional conferences and events. We've held a national event for LGBTQ+ party members, and this year we hosted a virtual International Cooperatives Day and Pride event. With the growth of our network at our national event in 2018, I was elected as our convener and Jane Cameron as our secretary. There was due to be further discussion about additional roles at our 2019 conference. However, we had to cancel that because of the snap election. I'm pleased that the party has now formally recognised all of its equalities networks, and that we're now all moving into a new phase of our development and activity. I'd like to thank the party for this and to congratulate everyone who's been elected to our representative council. For people here, you might like to know we're meeting informally after this event. We'll be having our first formal meeting over the next few weeks to elect our new officers and start all of the business. Since the summer, the party has started asking members whether they identify as a member of the LGBTQ+ community. We already have a membership of 213 party members. That's 1.8% of all party members. We're sure that there are more. So if you're joining in on this event, or you know other people who are part of the LGBTQ+ community and in the party, please contact membership@party.coop so we can update our records. You can also join our Facebook group and follow us on Twitter. So what about the wider movement? A quick search of the Co-ops UK database of over 7,000 co-ops in the UK identifies only 7 LGBTQ+ specific cooperatives. Glasgow Pride, 4 housing co-ops in Edinburgh, Hove and Nottingham. These are all led by women, and 3 of them are exclusively for women. And that probably tells us an enormous amount about the needs of our lesbian and female bi community. And there are 2 venues in London. COVID-19 has put the future of many venues in jeopardy. Lockdown, a lack of communication from government, social distancing rules limiting capacity, and uncertainty about the future has left many cultural and arts venues at risk of closing their doors for good. For the LGBTQ+ community, having a safe and unprejudiced place to socialise, free from fear and harassment, is so important. LGBTQ+ venues are an important part of our community's identity and heritage. These spaces were already under threat, with a report from University College London showing that there'd been a 58% loss of spaces in the capital in the past decade before this crisis. And for those of us outside London, we'd know that that has actually been much worse. And for those of us in predominantly rural areas, people might now have to travel 100 miles or more to find their nearest venue. Despite LGBTQ+ venues often being thriving and successful businesses, today's study shows that these are closing because of external pressures, such as large-scale developments, a lack of safeguarding measures in the existing planning system, and the sale and change of use of property by landlords. Other major drivers of closure include rising business rates and rents, as well as a change of ownership, which can sometimes lead to venues being targeted at non-LGBTQ+ clientele. In London, a Labour mayor means steps were already being taken to safeguard LGBTQ+ venues with an annual audit, new safeguarding measures built into the planning process, and support from Amy LeMay, the Night Star, who I know is also involved in the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, who we'll be hearing from a bit later. And Amy's role is to mediate between venue owners, developers, and pub companies. Elsewhere, though, there are few protections. And even with these measures in place, both in London and across the country, this crisis has cast doubt on much of the sector's ability to survive. So this afternoon, we'll be exploring the challenges faced by venues, whether before, during, or after COVID, and whether there are community-led ways to protect LGBTQ+ heritage, such as listing them as assets of community value, community share offers, and different ownership models. I'm really pleased that we've got a great panel to lead this discussion. Each will have around 5 to 7 minutes for their opening remarks before we open the floor to questions. If you'd like to join in the discussion, please put your question into the chat box and we'll pick it up. Tracy Brabin MP was elected as the Labour and Co-operative MP for Batley and Spen in 2016, following the very sad murder of Joe Cox. She came from a successful career in television, film, theatre and writing, and had been a party activist for many years. Tracy has been a shadow minister since 2017, currently with responsibility for cultural industries. Throughout the COVID crisis, she's been highlighting the existential threat facing venues and the cultural sector, calling for better support, guidance and funding. James Lindsay has had a successful career in hospitality and retail. His involvement in the Royal Vauxhall Tavern stretches back to 2005, and he's been its CEO for the past 6 years. RVT is an iconic London landmark and award-winning cabaret, performance and club night destination, as well as being one of the 7 LGBTQ+ specific cooperatives. A community campaign resulted in the RVT being listed as an asset of community value, and it's now a listed building too, with Historic England recognising its significance to the LGBTQ+ community. In fact, it was the first building listed for that significance anywhere in the country. I think you'll agree this is a panel of people who know what they're talking about. So I'd really like to pass over first of all to Tracy and hear from her. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you so much. And what a real treat to be here with such a great panel. And thank you, Chris, for your opening remarks. I do think it's an existential crisis at the moment for venues. Just to give you a little bit of a background, as Chris said, I've been an actor and a writer for over 3 decades, and I've seen a real change actually in the accessibility and the openness and the honesty with which we can now talk about LGBTQ issues from 30 years ago to now. And certainly before I became an MP, one of my last jobs was a Noel Coward play at Raffles Hotel in Singapore. And I had friends who said, well, I'm not going to go up for that job because in Singapore, you can't be out. You can't be publicly out. And there's nowhere to go. And it was a 6-week job and it just wasn't worth them hiding their sexuality. And it just reminded you actually how the battle still goes on. And we know that venues are a family. They become a safe space, free of harassment and full of love. I declare an interest here because my youngest daughter is a drag queen and did very well in the Gold Rush drag competitions in Hackney. And I just, the sense that of being there is so inclusive and so protective, kind, full of empathy and generosity. And those spaces are really hard to find and they're pretty unique, actually. Obviously, we've had lockdown. Only last week, I went to the Phoenix Arts Theatre in the bar there to see, it was a Simpsons night of drag. And my girl was doing a double act as one of the twins in Simpsons. But the audience, yet again, very diverse, very inclusive, but there was a real sense of thank goodness we can come back. Thank goodness we can find each other and be here. And they put in great COVID, implementations to keep us all safe. But then come, 9:30, the lights come on and everybody has to leave because of the 10 o'clock curfew. Now, I'm not convinced the 10 o'clock curfew makes a difference to COVID spread. Certainly when we have to have COVID marshals at taxi queues because everybody from restaurants and bars is coming out at the same time, causing potentially a health problem. I'm not sure that 10 o'clock curfew is working, and it's also the impact it's having on pubs and restaurants and venues is really tough, when particularly 58% of space in the last decade has been lost in the capital. The capital is where you find you feel comfortable. People from the shires move to the capital because they feel they can be their true selves. And if our venues are closing in the capital, let me tell you what offer there is in Batley and Spen and in West Yorkshire. Now, I'm putting my hat in the ring for the mayor of West Yorkshire, and part of my pitch would be about diversity and inclusion, because I know that LGBTQ venues and that life and that energy and excitement shouldn't just be limited to Pride. It should be filtered through everything we do. And I think part of that is a fight to keep our venues open. And we know, don't we, that the 1.57 billion that the government have bailed out the creative industries, and let me say, I am incredibly grateful for every penny. I don't think it goes far enough. And certainly our freelance sector, our self-employed, are often slipping through the support network and are potentially leaving the sector. And I just say that because I know that so many drag queens I've spoken to have said, well, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I have to do at least one gig or, a couple of gigs at the weekend and one in the week to, just pay my bills. I'm going to have to look for a proper job. I just can't carry on. And those other jobs that kept creatives going, in hospitality, they are also being lost and under pressure. I do think also the uncertainty around the tiers, second, tier 2, tier 3, Businesses are really struggling about preparations. You know, can we meet inside, all of that? I think, as Andy Burnham has said quite eloquently, you know, that without the financial support, these hospitality and entertainment venues are going to go bust. We have to do everything we can in our power to ensure that those venues stay open, because where else is our identity? And certainly going around schools, which I love as part of my job as an MP, talking to young people who might take me on one side privately to tell me about their struggles with their identity. And to have a venue where you can go, where a safe space where you feel you're amongst family, is really, really vital in someone's journey to owning their identity. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm very interested to hear about the Vauxhall and how we can do more. And certainly the Music Venues Trust have done a great deal of work pressurising government to support those music venues. But we know, don't we, that so many of our great venues are rooms above pubs. And if pubs are closing, then those rooms are not going to be open. So I'm very interested to hear your questions. You know, always up for conversations about what the Labour Party can do better as well when it comes to LGBTQ rights and also accessibility and inclusion. So thanks ever so much for inviting me today. And over to you, Chris.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tracy. Thanks for everything you're doing. And I think what you're saying is really important to all of us. I think one of the great things about the Co-operative Party is we don't just talk about it, we do it. And as a movement, we really make a difference across all of our communities in the country and increasingly in our diverse communities. So being a practical party as well as a policy party, it's great today to be able to welcome someone from the movement. And James, if I pass over to you so that you can tell us what it's really like on the ground and some of the fantastic story at RVT.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Tracy, thank you for a lovely introduction there. Now, I have wished that you could be my MP, but as it happens, we have a very good MP in terms of Florence Eshilomi, and since the 20th of March, I've done nothing but bombard her with correspondence with the way that the disgraceful approach in terms of how I see it from the commercial aspect of the way that Royal Vauxhall Tavern has found itself in, and it's gone like from one set of circumstances to another, where in terms of lockdown with no trading to the tiered system and the limited trading. And this week, I think with a breath of fresh air, I have to say I totally support Keir Starmer's approach along with Andy Burnham in moving towards the circuit breaker effect, because I think this stop-start and a winter of discontent is not good for the way in which the LGBT venues across the UK would be deeply and devastatingly affected by all of this. You know, I would be very reluctant in these kind of forums to talk about the financial aspect and the way that the venue would have to like stack up. But I am going to share some information with you because I think it's important to see the bigger picture. And one thing about Royal Vauxhall Tavern is we don't go out there to ensure that from a commercial perspective that we are a profit-driven organisation. You know, what is important here is that people come and participate in the culture and the arts, and they do that within which makes RVT a commercially affordable venue. So the price of the ticket, the price of the drinks at the bar, all of that has to be able to work to be able to make sure that the development can focus and it can deliver. And with Royal Vauxhall Tavern, we are one of the most, if not the diverse venue in London in terms of like the diverse programme that we have to encompass all of the groups that form part of the LGBT community, whether it be trans, whether it be marginalised groups. You know, everybody comes together, and it's important that that recognition is there from a reputational value that RVT has to be able to make sure that we continue to be a market leader in terms of what we do, and we make no qualms about in terms of wanting to be that market leader, because we take great pride in terms of the awards that we get and the recognition that we get, and that's all down to the people who are involved, from the artists, from the promoters, from the team involved at Royal Vauxhall Tavern. All of those people have a very key role to play. So since March, when forced lockdown came, you know, this business, this as a single business, this business has lost £840,000 worth of revenue. Now, even as a small independent company, that can only stretch so far. We don't have the support of like national companies who've got 2,000 plus pubs or venues under the portfolio. So we are at it on our own. And in the initial days, we got no financial support other than the measures that came in about the business rates relief, which was great. A small part, but great. So some fantastic news today. And Tracy, you alluded to that in your introduction there. We got great news yesterday about being awarded £225,000 from the Lifeline grant of the 1.7 Cultural Recovery Fund. We are absolutely ecstatic to have that, because that gives us this lifeline now for at least the next 6 months to be able to make sure we can continue our business, we can support our artists, we can make everybody here be part of our community with the restrictions that are in place and with the loss of business that we continue to have. So hopefully that paints like a little bit of an overview picture for you. And I would also be delighted to take questions from people as well in terms of whatever those questions are.
Great, thanks a lot, James. And the questions are coming in and they're nice and meaty. So I think they might tax all of us. I just want to let people know that we'll do our best to get through all of them, and we've got a nice healthy bit of time for questions and discussion. But we will also make sure that these get fed in to the LGBTQ plus Co-operators Representative Council, because some of them are about policy and action, and we can look at how we can build them into our work programme as well. So as well as the discussion here, I just want people listening to know that we will do that. And I'd like to start with a question from one of our newly elected Representative Council members, Chris Wills, who's a councillor up in Manchester. Areas like Canal Street in Manchester tend to cater predominantly to able-bodied, cis, white, gay men with plenty of disposable income. Is there an opportunity here for co-ops to be part of providing a more diverse offer for LGBTQ plus people? Don't know which one of you might want to start on that one, but James, you run a venue. It might be interesting for your perspectives on that broader range of people and activity.
Absolutely, and what a lovely question to start off with. We are very proud to be able to say that we do provide those services. Disabled Here and Queer are part of what happens within one of our venues, and we do 3 or 4 major events with them a year to try and raise funds for whatever causes that might be. But we do have the situation where we have to look at the venue in a different way, where we have to put in terms of facilities, in terms of like ramps and additional facilities and toilets for people who come in terms of wheelchairs, etc., where those are something which tend to get missed. Now, even as a venue with the age of Royal Vauxhall Tavern, it's over 150 years, so there's not much happened to this venue here. So even in the recent years when it was grade 2 listed and we got the sui generis status, etc., those things don't address the things about the toilet and provision of toilet facilities. So we've all got to work very much harder to be able to make sure that we become fully encompassed in terms of the services that we provide.
Thanks. And actually, Sue Milestone, who's from Bristol and a former NEC member of the Co-operative Party, has raised that whole issue of accessibility for inclusion as well, and that's an important thing for all of our venues to think about. So thanks for that additional thought, Sue. Tracy, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, but I absolutely agree, because certainly the steps are precipitous and very dangerous in 10-inch high heels as well. So I think you're right that the scene did start in dingy pubs. I'm not saying the Vauxhall Tavern is one, but in dingy pubs and smaller venues out of the way, and that tradition has sort of kept going, hasn't it? That sort of cabaret style, pub come cabaret. I do think you're absolutely right. I mean, we have the Equalities Act 2010. It's really important that we include every member of our community. I think it is tricky because venues are financially on a knife edge often, and certainly COVID won't have helped that. But I think the Co-op does have a role to play, that there is the potential to find new venues that are maybe more modern, that are more accessible, or certainly applying to councils for them to get their minds around that you can't have a venue without that accessibility. And certainly even I set up the Batley and Spen Youth Theatre, and we are looking for a venue, and there's no way you can look at a venue anymore without disabled access and accessible toilets. So it's something that's certainly at the front of my mind, but probably it's a leftover historical outcomes from where things started back in the day. But I think now it's really, really important to hear those to hear your voice, and to make sure that you also feel confident to step up and demand more for what's offered locally for you. Contact your MP, work with your MP to to maybe potentially campaign if there's a venue you particularly like that you want access to. It is about working together in that cooperative way to get things done. So I wish you all the best of luck, but you're right, it's not good enough, and we do need to go further.
Thanks a lot there, Tracy. Still talking about venues, but on a slightly broader perspective. We'll start with Kate, but I'm also going to bring in Richard Eason's comment as well. Kate says that as a woman, she often feels less welcome at some LGBTQ venues than her older male friends do. She wonders whether there's a Co-op answer to help ensure that there are spaces for lesbians and bi women, and for younger people who are perhaps too young to go to a pub or a club, but also need safe spaces. I suppose that sort of in some ways links to the fact that our traditional spaces have been alcohol-led spaces, and alcohol-led spaces aren't always right for everyone. So as a community, that has some impact on us. And Richard Eason sort of takes that a little further by saying that reimagining our high streets provides an opportunity to repurpose premises for LGBTQ plus communities. And how can we get guidance and support to form a co-op to seek venues like that, which is, I think, is a really interesting thought. Don't know which one of you might want to kick off first on that.
If I could, I do think that looking again at the high street, I mean, the high streets, particularly out of city centres, were very challenged. I think COVID has changed everything, actually. I've just been in Bradford now, and it's almost empty, the city centre. Whether that's a combination of people not going into work Monday to Friday anymore, working from home, or just economic squeeze. But I think looking at our local high streets, there is an opportunity to not only green our high streets, but also open them up more widely to communities. And certainly when you're talking about spaces to go where you feel welcome and included, well, I've seen some amazing choirs actually for young people who are LGBTQ. And I think there's, you don't necessarily even have to sing very well, but you're included in that choir. So I think it is about identifying other options that aren't necessarily, like you say, alcohol-led. And lots of young people now actually aren't drinking. So I think maybe we are shifting away from the alcohol-fueled evening. But I think you're absolutely right. We have an opportunity here that maybe once in a decade opportunity to reimagine our high streets, engage more with our communities, and build a presence so that others will know that there is a space for them on their high street. I think it's a great idea, and I'd love to see any plans you might have or any thoughts.
Thanks. James, have you got any thoughts? I know some of my friends who are licensees say they prefer selling soft drinks because they get better margins on them, but
maybe not the right topic at this stage in the game in terms of the restrictions in place, but just an answer there. I mean, the breadth, I think, of knowledge in terms of my commercial background. So as a young guy at 30 years old, I took on the MD role at Meadowhall in Sheffield by getting it out of the ground. And then 5 years later, I went across the Pennines to do the same with the Trafford Centre in Manchester. And for almost like 25 years, I led the shopping centre industry with the big Westfield shopping centres in London and around the UK. And part of that, where the non-LGBT side of it would be to focus on the likes of the Sunday. So the Sunday trading, I was very influential in getting that legalised back in the 1990s. You know, the parent and child facilities in shopping centres, which something was not recognised before Meadowhall came along in 1989, all have had to make progress. And as probably an ardent out-of-town shopping centre person at the time, you know, the high street didn't really matter too much to me. Having come full circle in all of that, the high street is the hub of everything that goes on, you know, in terms of activity that happens. And I've not been inside a shopping centre now in 12 years, and because the high street plays that really key role in what happens now. With Royal Vauxhall Tavern, it's a destination venue. You know, we have to make sure that we remain viable and we provide the right level of facilities right across in terms of what our event and entertainment program would be. If we don't provide those, then we become like less effective in terms of the services that we can offer and provide. So I think that we all do have a role to play, and I really would be keen to talk to many people after this debate is over about how we can make RBT still a better place to be.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. I'm going to come straight back to you because I have a question specifically for you. And please rest assured, if you think I've not picked up your question yet, I'm trying to follow the questions that come in some sort of logic. So I am aware of the questions I've not yet asked, and I will come back to them. But Ian has asked you, James, what would your ask be of your local community and the wider LGBTQ+ community to help protect the RVT and other venues? And what actions do you think we should be taking as a result of listening to today's discussion?
Ian, interesting question, particularly for me, because in 2005, when I first became involved with Royal Vauxhall Tavern, it was a 2-day-a-week venue, and it was a real spit and sawdust venue. You know, it was open on a Saturday and a Sunday, and then it opened on a Friday, and it was purely for club nights. So there was nothing about the programs that we are doing now about the diversity of entertainment that we provide. So when RBT got going, there was 2 people involved in it, you know, and we committed £600,000 worth of our own money to put into the venue. It was quite clear that come 2014, you know, because we weren't recognised in market and in terms of leading the industry at that time, that if you don't do that, then the venue gets into trouble. And that's exactly the situation that we found ourselves in. It was not commercially viable. The 2 directors were not seeing eye to eye. We both decided that to sell Royal Vauxhall Tavern was the best way out, to allow somebody else to come in to take that on. And what actually happened was it was an overseas investment company who bought Royal Vauxhall Tavern, and the decision was the 2 directors would walk away. So just as the deal was about to be complete, somebody picked up on my LinkedIn profile and my commercial background and said, look, would you hang around in the short term to be able to make sure that this could work? I'd stepped out of a 250 grand a year job in terms of with Westfield to come and put my neck into the noose for Royal Vauxhall Tavern. So we went from a non-commercially viable venue to in the initial period in 2014 and 15, where we had to reinvent ourselves and our business model. And we then started to bring in all of the promoters to look at the club nights at weekends. Midweek, we operated in a cabaret theatre style setting to try and get each of those nights right, to be able to pitch them to the various groups involved in terms of the LGBT community. And within like 3 years, the venue had got itself turned around. It became commercially viable. It then got grade 2 listed, which I wasn't involved in, and that was to do with a number of people like in London making that happen, followed by the sui generis status of the venue, followed by sort of other measures like put in by the local authorities. All welcome measures. I have no problems with any of that. And it does protect like the venue. However, protection can only come at so far until like again, the commercial viability, not with me, but with any person who might be the leasehold owner or like have a licensed interest in the venues. If they're not commercially viable, people won't hang around. So we've got to make sure that you get that balance right.
Great, thanks there, James. I think it's quite interesting that both the RVT and the Joiners Arms, which is in Clapton, and the other venue, both got listed as assets of community value. So if you're listing in on this and you're wondering about what you might do for your local venue, if you still have one, do consider the Love It List It campaign that the party is running at the moment to list important community facilities as assets of community value. And that's something that we could all get involved in first steps of saving our bit. Then James wants to come back in.
Sure, asset of community value, fantastic thing in terms of RBT was made an asset of community value back in 2014, 2015. But actually, I mean, from Tracy's perspective as well, you know, there are loopholes there that if those loopholes are not addressed, then the asset of community value means nothing. It is meaningless. Yeah. So if Royal Vauxhall, the freehold owners of Royal Vauxhall Tavern were to sell that on as an investment interest, then the asset of community value does not kick in. And I think that's really quite sad, because the whole process of the purpose of making asset of community value, like that measure to put that in place, those loopholes need to be addressed and tightened down.
And I know that as well as running the campaign to Love It and List It, I've certainly been in conversations with party staff involved in the campaign about what we do to strengthen the legislation and make it better for community groups, at the same time to close some of those loopholes and make it more than just a paper exercise. So I think that's an important point that we'll, I think, all continue to work on. Someone who's anonymous has talked about the fact that venues are important, but has highlighted risky behaviours fueled by loneliness and often exacerbated by apps. Just wondering how we might, as a party and as a broader co-operative movement, support better community building amongst the LGBT plus community. So that's less about physical premises and how we build ourselves as a safe and supportive community. So a very good question. Don't know, Tracy, do you want to have a little bit and give James a break on his voice?
A really super question, actually, because I think during COVID, the isolation for everybody has really exacerbated. And, you know, even if you're on Zooms all day, you feel like you're with people, but actually you're not. And without that contact and that just casual chat that isn't about work, about your dog, or about your, you know, your last holiday or the dream holiday you want, or what you're doing for Christmas, if anything at all. I think your life is very polarized, isn't it? I think the isolation is really right. And we're going to have a tsunami, I think, of loneliness, because already think about those people who are shielding, who have been shielding since March and now been told, you know, you can go out into the community. Well, it doesn't feel any safer than it did in March. So there are people who are very anxious about being in crowded spaces or spaces where they can, you know, hang out with others. So I think you're absolutely right. And the need for connection is so powerful that potentially people may do things out of their usual routine in order to connect. I think apps are good. I think, you know, the access that young people have now to love and to fun is terrific. And, you know, done in a safe way, it can be, you know, great fun, healthy, and incredibly enjoyable. But of course, there is a darker side, isn't there, to that offer. And certainly it's something I've been working on in the online harms bill to try and get that to come back to Parliament swiftly. It doesn't feel like the government are doing anything at speed when it comes to social media and calling out the platform owners. So it's very much in our mind, it's front of our mind. And also Labour are running a digital survey. So do check that out as well if you want to feedback on your experiences or how you think things could be improved, or who do we hold to account when things go wrong. And of course, you know, meeting strangers on an app is the same as meeting a stranger in a bar and going into something that's risky behavior. You know, you do take a risk. I've always said, you know, look, you make sure someone knows where you are. we think with our phones that people will always know where we are because we can always ring for help, but it's not always the case, is it? I think the loneliness angle and well-being is something that I will be looking into post, as we hopefully come out of COVID, how we try and look at, for example, social prescribing, and expand that offer. So we have, on the one hand, a load of young people slightly adrift, the 2020 generation, not able to start their careers in the way they'd hoped, energetic, ambitious, hardworking. And then we will have a raft of people who are lonely and isolated with potentially symptoms that can be treated not necessarily by prescriptions, but by community engagement and kindness and friendship. So I think if we expand social prescribing, as I was saying, about choirs or bicycle repair clubs or art or drama or dance with dementia sufferers and so on, I think there is an opportunity for us to be more engaged. And I am hopeful that what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, that community spirit, that sense of coming together, that cooperation isn't lost as we in all this chaos, and that we can remind ourselves actually how it made life a bit better, that we knew our neighbors, that we shopped for someone, that we gave something back to others. And I'm hoping that the work that I'll continue to do is to try and build those connections and build those bridges between communities and individuals. And be very interested, if you wanted to talk further about your experiences of how an app made, contributed either to your loneliness or it helped. It would be very interesting to hear that.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And you actually have addressed another point from another anonymous person who has identified the impact of COVID-19 having an impact on LGBTQ plus people with mental health problems. And we know that for younger LGBTQ plus people, suicide is a higher instance. We know that depression can be at higher levels as well. And I know, as someone who has an ongoing battle with depression and who is living alone, that lockdown has not been good for my mental health, and it has been hard work. You're right, these sorts of events don't really link you to people in the same way, and that can be really difficult. So I think you've raised some really useful points there, and some opportunities for people to contact you outside of this environment about the things you've raised. I don't know whether you want to feed in on any of those sorts of topics, James, from your perspective, or whether you're sort of feeling they're a bit outside your normal remit.
Absolutely fine. I mean, look, I take on board fully what Tracy has said there. Now, as a venue, the stigma we had was to be, I suppose, to be like a typical bar, and we're nothing but a typical bar, because with the cabaret performance club night, it gives like the whole range and diversity. So the situation we're in at the moment is that pre-COVID, on a weekend here, we would have 400 plus people in our venue. At the moment, because of like the COVID restrictions and the table service and the test and trace and the sanitization, we are allowed 75 people in our venue. What we've got to make sure happens is that people who come here, they're coming here for a reason, and that's to carry on that community aspect of being able to meet and see people in person. Now, I wouldn't want to put down the apps about the dating on the apps, because I think they played a role. What they don't do, they take away that personalised thing of coming into a bar and meeting and seeing people face to face and having that heart-to-heart chat. You don't get any of that with the social contact on an app. So I'm going to defend like the community spaces to say this is where people need to be.
Don't blame you for doing that either, James. And I know some of the questions have talked about the broader LGBTQ plus community and how people can get involved. If you don't know, there is the Consortium of LGBTQ voluntary community sector organisations, which is an umbrella body for our sector in terms of community groups. So have a look, see what community groups there are in your area, make some contact, get involved. I think as co-operators, we need to put that into practice, not just within our own movement, but outside as well. And I know here in Plymouth, I actively get involved in Plymouth Pride Forum, who don't only run our Pride event, but also do fantastic work with LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers, run events for people who are isolated and have had to move those online, run an archive and do all sorts of other things. We've got choirs and other things happening in Plymouth because there is that bit in the middle. So find your local people and get involved and spread the cooperative message out to them as well. And people have asked about support for setting up co-ops. Co-ops UK has got some great resource. The Co-op group finances the Hive, so have a look at the Hive. There's all sorts of stuff there about how to set up stuff. There are cooperative development agencies around still, I'm glad to say, not as many as we would like, but they are there and use them. And if you've got an enlightened council, you'll probably find there's some economic development officers that know a bit about how to support setting up co-ops and mutuals. And I'm pleased that in Plymouth, I've got a whole team supporting that sort of agenda here in the city. So don't be afraid to contact all of those and make some contacts and look at what support is out there. If you do get stuck, do get in touch with us, because we'd like to see more LGBTQ plus cooperatives about venues and whatever else setting up. Moving to other questions, the questions we've got now are a bit more about us as a network. And Pretty tells us she's really pleased to hear about the work of the network. Are there many LGBTQ plus Labour and cooperative councillors? We know there are some, and we've got some of them sitting on our representatives council. We've also got some of our MPs who are members of our community as well. So that's really positive. One of the things we did in the setting up of the network phase over the summer was worked with our members to identify what we should be doing as recommendations to the new Representatives Council. One of those is we should have an officer specifically looking at how to support people into becoming elected representatives from our community. So that will mean we will need to identify who we've got as well as who else. So watch this space, Pretty, because I think there is a role for us not only to support the protection and development of LGBTQ plus venues, but also other parts of the LGBTQ plus community in developing so that we have a vibrant community around us. But to have that safe space really matters, and the RVT is doing that in its area. We need lots more of those all across the country to support our community. So we'll come back to you on that one. And Valerie Bosman-Quashie wants to know how to be a better ally. What a fantastic thing to ask, Valerie. I really appreciate that. You're an anti-racist campaigner and you know how to do stuff on anti-bias training, but not sure about how to champion support for our community. Thank you. That is such a lovely thing to ask. Do join our Facebook page, or Facebook group rather. Our Facebook group is not just for members of LGBTQ plus cooperators, it's for our allies as well. And one of the things that I think is a recurring message through the diversity networks sessions at Party Conference this year has been the importance of intersectionality. We don't just live in one box. We are multifaceted people. And actually, as an anti-racist campaigner, I'm sure that you're aware of issues in some faiths and some cultures that mean for members of the BAME community, coming out means losing everything. And that's a really difficult thing. And I think understanding intersectionality means that we can support each other better. It isn't about a hierarchy of oppression. It isn't about one or the other. It's about what we do together. And the more we stand together in solidarity, the better it is for all of us. I don't know whether either of you want to comment on that broader element of allies and support for our community.
If I could just say, what an amazing question. And haven't we seen it during Black Lives Matter, that our role is as allies to amplify and to celebrate and to support, because it must be absolutely exhausting to be the one that's always having to explain your life. And I think it's really important to be surrounded by people who get you and will always speak up on your behalf. And part of that is any homophobia, any obviously racism, or any language in you know, that comes into your life, and you're in a room where someone speaks in that way. We've all got to speak up. And also it does, these sorts of sessions really alert me to the fact that I haven't in the last few months read a book written by an author that's publicly out. I was also really minded during the Black Lives Matter to look again at my bookshelf and who I'm hearing stories and creativity from. It's really, really important that allies also audit their life, because you can fall into patterns that are easy and comfortable, but actually you've got to get out of your routine in order to be a proper ally. And certainly it's not just about joining your friends on the Pride March, it's being an ally every day of the week, calling out homophobia on Instagram or TikTok or wherever you see it, and you know, being loud and proud for your friends, but also, you know, get involved in political life. It doesn't have to be as a member of parliament, but as a councillor. You know, the cooperative movement is very welcoming and inclusive. By getting involved with your values, we can become the many with the same voice. So, you know, we can make change when we are in agreement about what needs to happen. So thank you for that. And whoever is your MP, I would suggest you volunteer for them, and you know, give them a bit of your time, so that you can also share that desire that we should all be allies to those who are discriminated against. So thank you.
Thanks, James. I don't know whether you want to come in on that sense of allies and working together.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at, again, 5 years ago at Royal Vauxhall Tavern, we would be quite limited in terms of what we would offer. Now we've got the Co-operative Club, which in terms of POC, we do those like once a month, and we do super club nights once every 3 months with them. We've got the Jewish group Homo and Humus in terms of what we do. We've got the trans nights here. So I do hope that the fact that we are leading the market within the LGBT community, that this does go further afield. I would love to have a Royal Vauxhall Tavern in Manchester, in Glasgow, in Belfast, and to be able to roll them out, you know, because I'm very passionate to be able to make sure that our community is represented.
Great, thanks, James.
I am so happy to work with you on that, James. Come to Leeds, come to Bradford, Halifax, anyway, Wakefield, just come north.
Thanks. I think, James, there are so many of our existing venues who could learn so much from what you are already doing, and you know, it sort of shows the power of a different approach to managing a building, and thinking about that from a broader community perspective than just going down to the pub for a drink.
Sure, just one final thing. Last year, about 6 months ago, we introduced the Royal Vauxhall Tavern Manifesto. And that was a set out of how we operate as a business. And that is about, you come into our venue, you've got to respect our venue, you've got to respect the people in there. And that respect has got to be shown, and like throughout everything that we do. That has dealt with a number of issues of people coming in from outside the LGBT community who think that it can be treated like a normal straight venue. Well, it can, because, you know, the respect that we have to afford each other here. And if nothing else from today, I would love other venues to roll that out.
Brilliant. We'll get details of that. I think we'll be starting newsletters to our members soon, as we sort of really pick up the ante. And Marta has just said that there's no LGBTQ plus venue for miles around where she lives. I'm not sure where Marta lives, but that isn't an uncommon experience for many people in the country. And she thinks there'd be some demand for something, doesn't know how to start or even to find other people to do it with. I think that's a really good point, Marta. Hopefully some of the thoughts about how you might find other LGBTQ plus people who might be like-minded and convert them into cooperators would be great. But also we maybe need to think about how we can do what some other co-ops have done, like Unicorn, who've put together a guide as to how they did it, and promote some of those bits that show good practice and tell stories. And, you know, if it weren't for the fact that we were in lockdown and couldn't do things, we'd be talking about how could we have an event somewhere that meant that we could go and visit the RVT and see what it looks and feels like as co-operators. Maybe one day we'll all be able to do that and actually see it and meet people. But one of the things we're also going to do, Valerie, is once we've got a bit of a better understanding of who our members are, is look at how we can begin to introduce people to each other, and as a network, build friendships and support for each other as we think about cooperative solutions to not just this, but many other issues that our community faces. We've just had a comment added that it's not just about spaces, it's also about where people live. And obviously I've mentioned some housing co-ops, but for older people, what's the potential for LGBTQ plus care home co-ops? And I think as a single gay man, the thought of having to be put into a care facility which didn't recognise and understand me is something I wouldn't particularly enjoy. So something else to add to our agenda there. I'm going to pull the questioning to a close now with one final bit, which isn't a question, but a comment. Jane Cameron, our secretary at the moment, says, congratulations to James for all the work at RVT regarding community. She's been going there for many years and has followed all its changes closely. She says it's one of the only clubs she can go to with her friends who have accessibility issues, and she's hopefully looking forward to going to Butch Please on the 13th of November. So there you go, James. You've got one of your customers here who appreciates what you're doing, not just as a bar, but as a real safe space for our community. I'd like to thank everyone for their questions. They've been really interesting, positive, thought-provoking, and just show that this is a topic that we can explore some more and do some more work on. I'd also like to thank James and Tracy for taking time out on a Saturday afternoon to sit in front of a computer screen and share their perspectives and experience and expertise with us. It's been really, really appreciated. And thank you too for the team from the party who've gone behind the scenes, so to speak, and done all the techie stuff to make this happen. This has been a fantastic conference, and it's my job to say our final farewell. I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who's participated. Thousands of us have listened in on sessions. I think if you're anything like me, you've been challenged, you've been inspired, and you've spotted all sorts of things you want to look at. And I've got a whole pile of web pages open for further examination of all sorts of co-ops doing practical things around the country that I want to get replicated here in Plymouth. So have a look. All of those sessions will be going on the party YouTube channel, so make sure that you go and watch them and get inspired from them if you weren't able to join in. And the great work of the party doesn't stop here. It isn't a year till we get back together. There's all those campaigns that we're involved in, whether that's on food justice, on modern day slavery, on violence against shop workers, on love it or list it, or anything else. So do keep on getting involved, and we can all do that. The weekly Cooperation Lives will be kicking off again on Wednesday, the 21st of October at 6 o'clock. The subject of that is unconscious bias. What is it? And what will me do to make sure that we address it? It's the first of our new series of weekly Zooms, and many of us have joined in the last series over the lockdown in the summer. So do regularly check out the Cooperation Live page on the party's website for the future programme, and join in the COP Party Hive on WhatsApp to get updates on WhatsApp, which is a really useful way of just quickly registering. Our next party conference is the local government conference on Saturday, the 21st of November. So if you're a councillor or a candidate, that's a good one for you. I'm not quite sure what the programme is yet, and we've not yet had a chance to talk about it, but I'm sure we'll be trying to bust a fringe in one way or another, because that would be good for us to pick up on the stuff that we were asked about earlier in terms of our members. So thank you for everything. It has been a fantastic 9 days, and a big thank you to everyone who's made this final session so good. Hopefully next year, we won't only have a formal session with a proper panel where we can sit in a room together, we'll also be able to go down to a local LGBTQ+ venue and have a drink together and chat and get to know each other better. But until then, stay well, keep safe, and carry on cooperating. Thank you.